Unfortunately, sleep apnea runs in my family. I remember family vacations where I considered cashing in all of my allowance money so I could get my own hotel room and not have to listen to the epic snoring battle that was taking place between my parents in the queen bed next to me. I had made it 29 years in life without ever being accused of snoring by any former roommates, boyfriends, or family. However, a few months of regularly waking up feeling like I was out of breath with my heart racing along, and having consulted a healthy dose of websites discussing sleep apnea finally convinced me that the family curse had descended upon me. I went to a doctor with visions of scaring away every potential future mate by wearing a sleep apnea mask that made me look like some kind of H.R. Geiger nightmare. I wasn't diagnosed with sleep apnea yet though. My HMO finance physician, who had an office above a dry cleaner in a part of town that had never even heard of the word gentrification, told me the best and cheapest way to figure out if I had sleep apnea or not would be to record myself sleeping each night for a few weeks, and he could review the tapes and decide. I thoroughly questioned this method, but my doctor explained to me the other option of coming into a facility to do extensive testing would cost upwards of $2,000, even with my wonderful insurance. It would also require me sleeping in a doctor's office from time to time. He assured me videotaping myself would be the easiest and cheapest way, and one of his nurses assured me she did the same exact thing, and it worked well. I couldn't help but laugh that night when I set up my camera and tripod aimed at my bed like I was going to shoot some kind of low-budget porn, but I figured it was worth it to find out if I had an ailment that would shave years off of my life and to save some serious money. The biggest actual downside of the thing to me was wearing pajamas for the first time since I was a preteen. I had grown accustomed to sleeping in my birthday suit to aid in keeping myself cool in the fight against the warm Southern California nights. The 3 weeks of filming went by quickly. I was putting in long days at work and pretty much coming home and crashing each night. The only time the filming actually really affected me was one Saturday when I came home drunk, hit record, and then passed out fully clothed on top of the covers. I considered deleting my drunken moment, but figured it might be good to have a comparison to see how getting drunk affected my potential sleep apnea. I left it on there when I turned in my recordings to my doctor. It took about a month before I was summoned back to my doctor's office to go over the results. Things started out well initially. My doctor told me he didn't think I had sleep apnea and that I had saved thousands of dollars and countless hours of facility testing, but things quickly took a sharp turn. I still remember my doctor casually saying the phrase that completely changed my life. The only time I really ever noticed even tiny disturbances in your sleep pattern was when your boyfriend would come in and out of bed. Huh? I fired back. Maybe you have the wrong video. I don't have a boyfriend. Once the doctor popped in the flash drive and showed me collapsing into my bed, I knew he had been watching the right video. I saw myself lying alone in my bed, but after about a minute of watching me sleep in fast forward, I felt myself go weak when I saw what he was talking about. An hour into the first night of my recorded slumber, a male figure appeared in the field of vision of the camera. Tall, gaunt, dressed in black, with a head of long black hair that obscured his face. I couldn't get a real read on exactly how the man looked, but he appeared to be white and probably in his 20s or 30s. I felt vomit bubble up to the back of my throat when I watched him stealthily slide on top of the covers on the side of my king-size bed, fold his arms across his chest and just lie there, staring up at the ceiling. "What the fuck?" I said, and literally recoiled into my plastic chair. How did I never wake up? "Well, I have to say you are the deepest sleeper I have ever reviewed," my doctor assured me, just before I vomited into the trash can. Apologizing, I cleaned it up, and the doctor and I watched the rest of the recordings. Each night followed the same routine. I would go to sleep, and an hour or so later, the man, who never gave a good look at his face, entered, laid down next to me, and then left just before sunrise. The man never did anything sinister, never anything sexual, never even touched me, and for some reason, it made the whole thing that much worse to me personally. I took the tapes down to the police station. They were little to no help. Weaned on a steady diet of cop shows, I expected to be helped out by a dangerously attractive male-female detective duo in their late 20s/early 30s who regularly peppered their conversation with flirtations at each other, but was far from what I got. I got one middle-aged guy with ears caked with flaky psoriasis who all but admitted he didn't give a shit about my case. He directly mentioned that any case without violence took a backseat in a district that was home to gangs of 5 different ethnicities. Every night after this day has pretty much been outright hell. I didn't even go back to my apartment. I had my dad and brother go in there and get my important shit and moved into my old room at my parents' house, 15 miles away from my old apartment. Despite my parents' high-tech security system, heavy locks on my old bedroom door and windows, the presence of my former USC linebacker dad in the house, and the family German Shepherd that was now sleeping outside my door, I would be lucky if I could muster a few hours of restless sleep each night. Everything in my life suffered. I could hardly focus at work. I was so tired. My already struggling social life became non-existent, and I had zero trust for any men I met. So I had to forget about dating. Things were so bad, I decided the best idea would be to just move. Work was happy to offer me a position in their Atlanta headquarters to try and rejuvenate my life. So, after 6 months of persisting torture, I packed up my stuff and headed across the country to move in with my cousin Felicia, who was hell-bent on turning my life around. Things got better in Atlanta. The anonymity it brought to my life and the distance it gave me from the incident slowly brought me back to life. The cops in LA had done pretty much nothing on the case, but they did find out one piece of evidence they shared with my dad and I before I left. It appeared my sleeping partner had been entering my apartment by simply picking my door handle lock with a credit card. This was a tactic that I regrettably had done myself before when I was locked out, and never really thought about how vulnerable it revealed the security of my apartment was. My dad had been doing more work on the case than the cops probably were, but he didn't tell me much about it until I reluctantly came home for Thanksgiving. My nerves were soothed by the gin and tonics the two of us had been swigging after our holiday gorging, and I open up to discussing the painful incident. There were actually security cameras outside of your door in the hallway of your building, my dad said, after a long discussion about whether I was comfortable with even talking about the whole thing. Now that you mention it, I do remember that, I said. Yeah, the idiot cops didn't even look at it as far as I could tell, my dad groused. But I did. I looked into it. According to you building's manager, they hadn't worked in a couple of years, but they just left them there broken. They got the security company to turn in the old tapes to the cops, but there was nothing showing the guy coming to your apartment at night. But I've been wondering, you said you got into your apartment before by picking the lock with a credit card. Did you ever tell anyone about that? As far as I can remember, no. And if I did, it would have been a close friend. It was literally like 5 years ago when I did that though. Judging by how furiously my dad started sucking down his drink, I could tell he was onto something. He killed all of the liquid in the glass and spoke up. If it was 5 years ago, those security cameras probably still worked. They would have had to have seen you do it. We both sat there silently for a few moments, soaking in the revelation. My dad started chewing on his gin-washed ice, and I finished the last of my drink. They also would have known that the cameras didn't actually work the past couple of years, I chimed in. We sat there silently for a few more moments before I asked another question. What was the name of the security company? Alterose Security's office was tucked into the middle of the endless sun-bleached field of warehouses and factories that was City of Industry, California. The hideous white stucco building the company took residence in looked possibly abandoned when my dad and I walked up to the heavily barred front door. My dad dialed up the listed extension for Alterose on a filthy little call box next to the door. Without a word from the other end, the box made a muffled noise, and the black barred door gave a hearty buzz. We entered a dark, stuffy little hallway that smelled like a mix of chlorine and the ghosts of cigarettes, led us to a thick mahogany door for Alterose. I followed my dad inside the office. The inside of the office looked like an episode of Hoarders. Dusty cardboard boxes were stacked all around the lobby like a game of office Jenga. The floor was littered with loose folders and random papers and decrepit-looking office equipment. I watched my dad almost fall on his ass after tripping over a 3-hole puncher. "Hello?" my dad called out in a thoroughly annoyed tone. It took a while, but eventually a voice responded behind a dead computer monitor that looked like it was from 1997. "Yes, come in." My dad and I followed the voice up to a front counter, and an elderly woman wearing heavy red eyeshadow, rouge, and bright red lipstick, which made her look a bit like a clown, stood up with her big hoop earrings jangling. She peered at us from behind gold glasses and smacked her lips. "Not sure if you have the right office. We are out of business as of 2 weeks ago." "Oh, no problem," my dad replied. "We were actually just looking to ask some questions." My dad's words sounded distant in my ears. I was distracted by something I saw on the wall next to the woman, a framed portrait plaque. The plaque featured a younger man of about 30 with long black hair, a gaunt white face with sunken eyes and an unsmiling mouth. There was no denying it. It was my sleeping partner from the videos. I noticed an inscription upon gold below the picture. "Employee of the month, Scott Lynn." Mom? I could barely get the words out. Where is he?" I pointed to the plaque of Scott Lynn with a wobbling hand, and the woman squinted up at the thing. My heart dropped when she spoke. "Oh, that's Scott. Worked here for years, but he up and left a few months ago to move to Atlanta. I don't know why. He never gave a reason." My dad gulped. I could tell he was going to say something he really didn't want to say. "I haven't been completely honest with you," he said. "There's something I need to show you." The video my dad pulled up on his laptop couldn't have looked more innocent at first. I was watched a trio of pre-teen boys I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood throw dunks into a swimming pool basketball hoop in a sun-drenched suburban backyard. Russell Miller, from down the street. His dad gave me this video a few months ago. I was about to ask my dad why I would care about Russell Miller and his little buddies holding a pool slam dunk contest, but was interrupted by the bride scene getting interrupted by a close-up of Russell breathing hard in the dark of night. Russell started to talk in between labored breaths. "We're egging every house up and down this block. No one is safe, I swear. Not even that big-ass guy down the block with the scary-ass German Shepherd." The video cut to a dark shot of the front of my parents' house, slightly obscured by some bushes that were next to the camera. The sound of young boys panting heavily served as the soundtrack until Russell stepped into the shot with an egg in his hand. The boys snickered. Russell cocked back his arm to launch, and I watched the first couple of eggs splatter just above my childhood bedroom window. He grabbed a couple more eggs out of the pocket of his hoodie and cocked back to launch them. He stopped. "What the fuck?" Russell whispered, and ducked back down behind the camera. "What happened? What happened?" the cameraman asked. "There's someone out there," Russell whispered, with his eyes glued to my parents' house. The camera panned through the brush and focused in on my parents' white house that was shining in the pale street light. It took a second for the shot to focus, but my breath disappeared once it did. Standing off to the side of my parents' house, crouching down next to small shrubs, was the unmistakable silhouette of a man. "What the hell is he doing?" the voice of the cameraman whispered. Scott's gaze turned towards the bushes where the boys were hiding. "Holy shit! Holy shit!" The boys' voices cried out over the final frames of the video. I looked to my dad with tears in my eyes. He looked like a dog that had just been scolded for going through the trash. "How did you not tell me this?" I asked with a shuddering jaw. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to make you feel even worse." "What the fuck, Dad?" "And there's something else I found out I haven't told you about yet. I found out our home security company was owned by the same company Scott Lynn worked for. It just had a different name. I didn't know, but it might mean he could tweak your security system," I said with disgust in my voice. "How did you let this happen?" There was nothing I could do. The morning air in my parents' living room we were sitting in suddenly grew cold upon my skin. I thought I could never feel worse than I did a few days ago when we found out about Scott's move to Atlanta in that cramped little office. But I did. I couldn't believe I had been living at my parents' house for so much of the time when Scott was lurking at least outside of the house, and maybe even inside. Do you think he got in the house? I have no idea. There are no cameras or anything in here, just the alarm system. But I swear to you, I check every inch of this house in the morning, when I get home from work, and before I go to sleep. Even the guest room, I swear to you. It was fitting that Scott looked so much like a ghost, because he pretty much was. The police started taking my case a little more seriously when it was revealed Scott had followed me to Atlanta, but they couldn't find out a single thing about him. The cops found no birth or census records for Scott. The paperwork they received from the security company was light and contained what was believed to be mostly false information. His name may not have actually been Scott Lynn, for all anyone ever knew. The only information anyone got was from the security company, who was able to track down a technician who said he got drinks with him a few times after work, said he liked whiskey sours. I was not the least bit surprised, but Scott had zero social media presence at all. This confirmed my theory that everyone under the age of 35 who has zero social media presence is probably some kind of violent or sexual criminal. Well, that's not entirely true, Scott had a social media presence. It just wasn't his own. Immediately after hearing about Scott's move to Atlanta, I started doing social media, digging into my cousin Felicia. Despite my pleas of never putting me on her profiles, Felicia would still occasionally put pictures of me on Facebook or Instagram in various group shots. I was reviewing Felicia's posted photos from the past few months to see how many I was in, and if there was some way I could be tracked in them when I noticed something that would make my stomach drop, just the same way it had when I watched the video of Scott lying next to me. There was a presence in nearly every recent picture Felicia had posted on social media that included me in an open public place in the past few months. The silhouette of Scott. There we were, smiling in the park for a friend's birthday, and a tall, slender, dark-haired figure lurked in the distant background. At a bar, there he was, off in the distance, saddled up to the bar. The last picture I clicked on was the worst. It was a small get-together with friends in the grassy courtyard of the apartment building where I lived with Felicia. I saw a faint figure walking on the sidewalk across the street from where we were picnicking. I couldn't even handle it anymore. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room, go up to my room, curl up, and die. I felt helpless. I didn't even feel safe in the room I grew up in. Even with the door locked, worse yet, I didn't trust my dad anymore. Why had he not told me about the video of Scott when he first got it? Maybe this was why Mom lost her mind all of those years ago. This is where I have to explain I haven't been completely honest while telling this story, and why I can't completely call my dad out without feeling like a hypocrite. I may have been referring to the house as my parents' house, but it had pretty much just been my dad's house for the past 14 years. We never figured out exactly what it was. After a lot of waffling, the doctors eventually just said my mom had a stroke. I thought it was extremely early onset Alzheimer's or late onset schizophrenia, but what the hell did I know? I was just a teenager. Regardless, 14 years ago, my mother completely changed. She went from being an outgoing social and financial stallion who was a partner at a law firm to a nearly bedridden shut-in that had a lot of trouble forming coherent sentences. I was young, but I could tell my dad didn't really know what to do. There was nothing physically wrong with my mom. I guess her blood pressure and cholesterol ended up being a little high, and she had to take medication for it. But other than that, all of her problems appeared to be with communication. What ended up happening with her pains me to even try and explain. I try to hate my dad for it sometimes, before I am able to convince myself I wouldn't really know what to do in the situation either. My mom ended up moving to the guest room next to my parents' room and down the hall from mine. For the past 14 years, my mom has spent 99.9% of her time in that room, mostly lying in bed and watching TV. Every once in a while, she would come downstairs to get food, but mostly my dad and I just brought it to her. As far as I knew, she had never left the house during the entire 14-year stretch. Whenever I was home, I would come into her room and talk to her for at least a few minutes or so, but it was not easy. She would get very upset when Dad and I got too far into the room. All she seemed to be able to talk about was what was directly going on in the room or what was on TV. Usually, our conversations revolved around her complaining about the color of the walls of the room, a loud toilet, or about Dr. Phil. It was pretty fucking awful. I could tell my social media revelations rattled my dad just as much as they did me, because he called the police and screamed at them for 10 minutes about how they should have an officer permanently parked outside of our house at night. He also called Felicia and demanded she follow my routine of living at her parents' house in the suburbs until Scott was apprehended. I asked my dad if he could also follow up with the family lawyer about a restraining order we had tried to file against Scott, but he reminded me that you cannot file a restraining order against someone who technically doesn't appear to exist on paper. My next demand to my dad was that we go spend the night in a hotel, but he wouldn't move on it either. His explanation was understandable. He didn't want to leave my mother in the house alone, and there was no way in hell she was going to go stay at a hotel. He didn't want me going to stay in a hotel without him either. My dad came up with a solution that worked for me. He spent the rest of the afternoon scouring the internet for the scariest looking private investigator he could find in the LA area. We settled on an Armenian guy named Buddy, who looked like the character Zangief from the game Street Fighter, and who had excellent reviews on Yelp. Before nightfall, Buddy was parked on the curb in front of the house in a black Cadillac chain, vaping and listening to hardcore rap. Buddy's presence and the appreciation I had for my dad spending the entire day helping me had soothed me enough to where a few drinks over the dinner we ordered from my favorite pizza place from childhood sounded like a good idea. The herby sweet gin and tonics my dad knew how to mix up so well were working like chamomile tea to my haunted soul. The world's oldest sleeping medication, alcohol, had done the trick. Not long after dinner, I climbed the stairs up to my room with such exhaustion I could barely conquer the handful of steps. Utterly gassed, I stumbled into my room, shut the door, and locked in behind me and tucked myself into bed. I awoke to the sound of feet shuffling outside of my bedroom door. I had managed to fall asleep for the first time since I had heard about Scott's move to Atlanta, but my slumber didn't last long. An alarm clock that read 12:34 a.m. meant I hadn't even been asleep for an hour. The amount of alcohol made me a little calmer than I should have been, but I was still right back on edge for the most part. I jumped up out of my bed and scrambled for the mace that now permanently rested on my nightstand. My eyes shot over to the little slice of light that cut through the crack in the bottom of the door, but there was nothing there. A touch more at ease, I jumped back upon the bed and sat up with my back against the headboard. I tried to catch my breath and ease for a moment and focused my eyes on the moonlit window. I immediately noticed something out of the ordinary with the window. There was something slimy and shimmery stuck to the top of the window with little flecks of something white in it. I got up from the bed and took a closer look. I could tell what it was right away. It was an exploded egg. The sight of the egg took me back to a hazy memory of the night before, awaking for a brief moment after hearing a couple of thumps. It was one of those memories that you at first aren't really sure if it was a dream or real, because it was so brief and clouded by the blanket of boozy sleep. This memory sparked a realization. The video my dad showed me wasn't really from months ago. It was from last night. It made much more sense. The neighborhood kid had probably been caught last night, and his parents probably gave my dad the incriminating video this morning. But why would my dad lie and say it was from months ago? I didn't have time to think up my own answer. There were footsteps again, but this time there were shadows of feet in the crack beneath my bedroom door. I let out a shallow scream and ran back over to the pepper spray. "Catherine," I recognized the voice that whispered through the door so quietly I could barely hear it. It was my mom. "Mom," I whispered back. My mom quickly jumped into her usual cadence. She could say words, brief sentences about something recent in her environment, but it was always patchy and vague. "Skinny, fucker, I can't smile." My mom started in. I wanted to ask for something more clarity, but I knew it was hopeless. I just let her go on into my door. He is, she stuttered. "He is staying. Ugly black hair." All it took was that last line to make me know what my mom was talking about and realize another lie my dad had told me. He had said he checked every inch of the house when he did his thorough search of the house earlier every day, but he had probably never, or at least rarely, checked my mom's entire room. My mom would physical attack you with her rarely clipped nails if you did too much prodding in her room. I bet he just opened the door and called it good. I frantically thought of where my cell phone was to call the police, but quickly realized I had left it downstairs in my drunken absent-mindedness. My mother's voice interrupted my frantic scrambling. "He's been in room days, I think looking for you." Just as my mom finished, another pair of shadowy feet appeared in the bottom crack of the door, and I screamed as loud as I could.